Hello friends! Today I'm going to be showing you how to brew your tea for kombucha. This is all you will need: a nice large pot, a gallon of water, something to sweeten it with. I'm using organic cane sugar. Your tea, you can use a combination of black tea and green tea or just black tea. And that's about it. I'm going to turn my heat on high and pour some of the water into the pot. The reason why I'm not going to prepare the entire gallon is because I would like to speed up the process of cooling the prepared tea down to the proper temperature, which is supposed to be between 75 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit, before I add my Scoby back into the tea. And if you make the entire gallon of tea, it's going to take hours and hours and hours for this to cool down on your countertop. So I'm going to boil this water. Once it reaches the boil, I'm going to add my 6 bags of black tea. You can do 6 or 8. 6 works just fine for my preferences. Once I put that in there, I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes. Once it has steeped, I will remove the tea bags. I will add my cup of sugar, stir it to dissolve, and then I'll show you where I add the rest of this water. Actually, I see it's a little bit low. I might add some more. Where I add the rest of this water to bring it down to the perfect temperature. All right, our water is boiling. We're going to go ahead and drop in the 6 bags of black tea. I'm going to use this heat-resistant spatula to push them down, make sure that they're submerged. And I'm going to set a timer for 10 minutes. Very important to note that I turned off the heat, as you can hear right there. You just wanted to bring the water to a boiling temperature, which is 212 degrees, and then drop in your tea bags, turn off the water, turn off the heat, and let them steep now that the water is at the correct temperature for us. It's going to steep for 10 minutes. Okay, so 10 minutes have elapsed. I'm going to remove the tea bags, squeeze out as much of the juice as you can. Squeeze out as much of the tea as you can. Set the bags aside. I'm going to turn off my timer here. I should have mentioned that you'll also need tongs or something to scoop the bags out with, a fork, whatever you prefer. I'm going to add my 1 cup of organic cane sugar. The tea liquid is still very, very warm, so it will be easy to dissolve this tea. If you let it sit before you remove the tea bags, or if you like to steep it longer than 10 minutes, which I wouldn't recommend, it would get quite bitter in my opinion, then the water might get too cool for the sugar to dissolve. And in that case, I have heard of some people adding the sugar along with the tea bags, but that's just a matter of preference. I like to add it after. So I'm going to continue to stir this until all the sugar is dissolved for about just a minute. So if this is your first batch of kombucha, this jar, this 1 gallon jar of yours, will be empty. This is not my first batch, so I have my first fermentation kombucha in that jar at the moment. Now I need to put my tea into that jar, therefore I need to remove this first ferment and put it somewhere else. I'm doing this today because I have fermented this now for 9 days, and it's time for me to flavor it and bottle it up and prepare it for its second fermentation. I should say each person's preference as well as the temperature of their home varies. Therefore, the first fermentation as well as the second fermentation, the length of time will vary based on your preference. If your house is very cold, it might take a little bit longer for it to ferment. If it's very warm, it might take less time, as well as the way that you prefer your kombucha to taste. Sometimes you might like it extra tart or less tart. It depends on your flavor preference. I've decided that 9 days in my house works best for my preference, and as you can see, the temperature ranges right now between 72 and 74 degrees. And it's ideal to keep it no colder than 70 degrees Fahrenheit and no warmer than 85 or 90 degrees Fahrenheit. So prior to filling this jar up with my newly prepared tea, I'm going to show you how I prepare my second fermentation of kombucha. And this will only be required, like I said before, if this is not your first batch. If it's your first batch, then the next step is easy peasy. You're going to pour the tea into here, and I'll show you that later as a matter of fact. But if you already have this occupied, we got to move it out of the way. So what I have here is I've got a glass bowl that everything has been washed in the dishwasher. And then this, I just poured distilled vinegar over it to completely kill off any other bacteria that might be on there. Be very careful when you're washing your utensils and your bottles and your bottle caps. Sponges are not recommended because they do harbor bacteria, and that could be very harmful in making kombucha. It could cause quite a problem. So yes, I just run mine in the dishwasher in the highest setting, and then I rinse it off with distilled white vinegar. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take off this cover here. I'm going to then wash my hands very, very well. I can even opt to pour a little bit more distilled vinegar over my hands just as an extra precaution. And then I'm going to reach in and grab that Scoby. I'm going to put it into this jar. I'm going to pour from here into here 2 cups, which is precisely this bottle. 2 cups is the same as 16 ounces. And that's my reserve. I'm going to reserve that for my very next batch, because every 1 gallon of kombucha with 1 Scoby requires, or not 1 Scoby, because sometimes more and more Scobies can grow, but you need a minimum of 1 Scoby, requires 16 ounces of what is called starter tea. So I'm going to pour that in there, the 16 ounces, reserve that to the side. By removing the 16 ounces, I now have 112 remaining. 128 ounces in 1 gallon minus the 16 that I'm going to remove leaves me with 112 ounces, which just so happens to be the bottles that I have here. This is a 48 ounce, a 48 ounce, a 16, and a 16. And that will add up to 112 ounces, which is perfect because the little bit of gap that I will have in each one, which will be 6 ounces, I'm going to leave 6 ounces here, 6 ounces here, 2 ounces here, and 2 ounces here. I'm going to fill that with juices, and I'll show you how I do that now. I wanted to show you my Scoby. You can see all the funky little bits in there that it has, and that is the magic creator. That is what creates all of that very, very, very good bacteria for your tummy. So I'm going to wash my hands now and reach in. I'm going to put the phone down because I don't have a stand yet. I'm going to put the phone down so I'm not touching my phone and then touching the Scoby, and I'll be right back. All right, our Scoby is safe, and I'm going to pour 2 cups, aka 16 ounces of reserve starter kombucha into this bottle for our next batch. If you'd like to stir it up, some people recommend that so that you get all the good bits all mixed in, but please make sure that whatever you use to stir it is also very, very clean and sterilized with vinegar or the highest setting in your dishwasher. No matter how hard I try, this bit is always quite messy. This is why some people prefer continuous brew method, where they use a jar with a spigot at the bottom so that they don't have to bother with this mess of spillage every time. I should also say that the only reason I poured it into here is because I wanted to measure it, not because I need it in that bottle. I can just go ahead and pour it over here. It doesn't matter either way. I'm going to be working fast enough where the Scoby is going to be okay. Sitting here for a little bit. I didn't want to clean an additional item to measure the 2 cups, but you can use something like, reach for that, something like a ball mason jar. They do have measurements on there. You could probably use that as well. It's easier to clean glass in my opinion, and there's no lead paint on the measurements on those ball glasses, and this one's already pre-measured. I don't think I said it so far. These bottles that I'm using to store my kombucha in and do my second fermentation in, that's from the brand GT's Synergy. They're just store-bought kombucha, and before making my own, I used to drink that one. It was my favorite, so I have got quite a bit of their bottles. And I like to remove the Best By date on top. You just use a little bit of acetone nail polish remover and a Q-tip and take that off, just because I like how it looks a lot better. I want to show you here this little makeshift diagram that I made for you. I hope it helps. This is how I'm going to, I had a little bit of spillage there, I apologize. This is how I'm going to measure my batch, this batch. I have 2 of the large bottles and 2 of the small bottles, 48 ounces each, 16 ounces each. I am going to measure approximately 42 ounces of this first ferment into both of the large bottles and approximately 14 ounces into both of the smaller bottles. And the remainder of it will be a combination of these juices. It's just what I have open right now for my previous batch, and I personally love this combination. It was my favorite, so I'm going to use it now. I don't want to go ahead and open other flavors of juices, so I'll just go through these first and then I go on to my next one. I prefer this brand. There's no ascorbic acid or citric acid as preservatives. It's just one ingredient, the fruit, and it's not from concentrate either. When my supermarket has it on the buy one get one free, I definitely stock up on those, and I recommend you do the same. You can flavor your kombucha however you like. You can use fresh fruit pieces, fresh fruit purees, frozen fruit purees, freeze-dried fruits, just juices, a combination of all of the above, whatever you prefer. This is my personal preference. I have made it with all of the above, and I didn't like having the fruit in the bottle. I just didn't like the feeling of it. I didn't like how it looked after the fermentation, where it got very pale and changed its color. I didn't like that I had to strain it, so I didn't want to drink it with the fruit in there. I would pour it over a mesh strainer into a mason jar and then drink it with a straw, and I just thought that's just wasteful, time consuming. I'd rather just open the bottle and drink it. So for now, I'm going to continue with just using bottled juices. Wish me luck. I'm going to pour out all the kombucha into the 4 bottles. All right. It wasn't as messy as I thought it would be this time around, but it was quite messy as well. I mean, I was thinking there's no reason why you wouldn't be able to use a spigot jar for batch brew as well, and it would just make your life a lot easier in my opinion. But this is the one that I bought when I first started, so it's the one that I have. Until I start brewing some more, it's what I'll continue to use. So I've got the 2 cups of my starter and my kombucha. Both of these are going to go back in here, and I'll show you when I add the tea how that goes. I've measured approximately 14 ounces in each of these and 42 in these. I'm going to add my juices now. I also wanted to note, look how beautiful the first fermentation, how much gas it already produced. I mean, it's absolutely incredible, and it smells really good here, guys. All right, I'm going to add some organic Concord grape juice to this one. And then some organic pineapple juice. There's mixed information out there about whether or not to leave Headspace in the bottle. Oh! It's up to you, I think. And the reason why I say it's up to you is because it depends on how brave you are and how much you're willing to test the limits. So when this starts fermenting, and you see in the second fermentation, you see a little hump on the cap. Oof. Then you got to decide if you want to burp it or not burp it. People differ on that opinion as well. Some people don't burp it at all, and some people, like me, who don't want an explosion on their hands, will burp it. So I'll get into that in a little bit later. I decided to try just pineapple juice in one of them and see if I like that as well, because I don't think I've done only pineapple juice. I'd recommend labeling your bottles so that you know when they started their second fermentation and you don't let them go too long. The kit that I bought came with this wonderful marker to mark on glass. Now these bottles over here can go to their safe space for the next few days while they do their second fermentation. Once I like their flavor, they're going to go into the refrigerator. I already know that I like 3 days for these, so they're just going to sit on the shelf for 3 days, and then they'll go in the fridge. Now I'm going to show you what we do with our black tea. Before I put this back in here, I'm going to take advantage of this empty jar. I'm going to pour my tea in here and use this thermometer to get it to the right temperature. You don't want it too hot or too cold. Too cold, and the Scoby won't be able to work its magic like it's supposed to. And too hot, and we could risk killing the Scoby. So I added my warm tea to the jar, and I'm going to add the room temperature water to dilute it. So this is why I don't like to add those into the jar before I add the new tea. If I had those in the jar first and then I added the tea, I could have potentially killed the Scoby, because right now it's measuring between 90 and 93 degrees Fahrenheit. So this is going to have to sit on the counter for maybe like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, because it's kind of cold in my house right now, for it to drop down below this 86 here. So it's a good 85 degrees at most. And then I'll add those back in there. And then that's it for this. We will have completed our second fermentation by flavoring our kombucha. not completed our second fermentation, prepared our second fermentation by flavoring it, and prepared another batch for our next first fermentation. So I'm just going to label, I'm going to wait on here, and then I'm going to label this jar with today's date so that I know when this one started, and I'm going to let this one go for 9 days on the counter. I wanted to let you know as well that your Scoby over time will grow new Scoby, and you can see here the difference between the original and that outer layer. That's a new Scoby forming on there. And I also wanted to say that you'll always have, from your gallon of water that you started with, you'll always have excess water depending on how much sugar you add, how long you might leave the pot of water boiling on the stove, and some has evaporated, how big or how many Scobies you have in your batch will determine how much you'll have left over. So I removed this much before I added into the tea to leave space to add the starter tea from our previous batch and the Scoby back in here without it overflowing. As you can see, it's still measuring at 90, still reading at 93 degrees. It's got to drop a little bit longer. It's only been about a minute since I last chimed in. So I just want to say I'm going to add these in there. I'm going to cover it up with my cloth and rubber band and set this baby aside for about 9 days. Thank you so much for choosing to spend your time with me. I really appreciate each and every one of you, and enjoy the rest of your day.